Is it Molly or?
It's me. I'm recording.
Oh, hey,
Oh, you are
hey, Molly.
recording. Are you, Molly, are you also like letting people in the waiting room?
Yep, I will be in charge of that.
My name is. Oh, okay. Recording is in progress. So my name is Kirill Avramov. I'm an assistant professor, political scientist, and the co-host of Balkan Circle, and a connoisseur of all things Balkan. So Fridays are time for fun, and today we're having a very interesting guest, a real good friend of our department and of the circle. So we do have Maša Kolanović. Mary, would you like to present our speaker today?
Yes, it's my pleasure today to introduce Maša Kolanović, who is a longtime friend, colleague, and collaborator. We have a long-time collaboration. Maša is an associate professor in the Department of Croatian Studies at the University of Zagreb, and also a well-known author in Croatia and beyond. She is a multi-genre author. Her works include poetry, such as the collection Leeches for the Lonely. These are the English language translations. The novel Underground Barbie that we were talking about today, which is now being produced as a play in Croatia, which sounds very exciting. The prose poem called Jamerika, My America, right, which is also quite beautiful. A short story collection, Dear Pests and Other Chilling Stories, which has won many awards. She also has a monograph, Strike Rebel Consumer, which she completed in 2011. And she publishes essays on literature and popular culture. She's co-edited volumes such as Comparative Postsocialism, Slavic Experiences, and the Cultural Life of Capitalism in Yugoslavia. And she has won many awards, including the 2020 European Prize for Literature for Dear Pests and Other Chilling Stories. And that was an EU-wide prize, and the Pula Book Fair Audience Prize within Croatia, as well as the Vladimir Nazor Prize for Literature in Croatia, which is a Croatian-wide prize. So she's very much a prize-winning author as well as a scholar. So we're very happy to have you here today, Maša. And her talk today is on capitalism's cruel nonfiction, which I love, an immigrant perspective on America.
Okay. Thank you, Mary, for this wonderful introduction. I hope I will get your trust back after these nice words. And really, thank you so much for the invitation to this talk. I'm so happy to be here. 2 years ago, when I supposed to come here, the pandemic paralyzed the country, and the rest is history. So I had one talk via Zoom, and some of your faces, which are familiar for me through Zoom, are now here real time, which is really, really awesome. So today I'll be talking about one topic which is part of my new book in making, which has a working title, Metaphor for Capitalism, Economic Imagery of the US in Croatian Literature and Culture in Eastern European Context. And in that book, I'm dealing with how USA was imagined to also different genre of literature and popular culture within a broader European cultural context. So speaking about US capitalism, I will start my talk with okay. Okay.
Oh, I see. Just this. Okay.
Okay.
I can advance.
Okay, thank you. I will start with a rhetorical question of posed by Richard Lambert, who was a former general director of Confederation of British Industry, who rhetorically posed the question, has there ever been a time when people really felt at ease with capitalism? This question was quoted in John Plander's book, Capitalism, Money, Morals, and Markets. I believe that we all have, deep down in ourselves, we have the answer for this question, but the period on which I'll be talking today really fits to some of the cruelest pages of history of capitalism. It is the beginning of the 20th century period, in the context of monopoly capitalism, marked by the expensive accumulation of capital, and which is also marked by the new technological and organizational forms, and accompanied by the exploitation of workers, mostly immigrants, workers from all over the world build the wealth of Henry Ford, J.P. Morgan, John Davison Rockefeller, to name just some of the few most common signifiers of wealth in the 20th century history of capitalism. And this immigrant perspective on US capitalism was also noted in many various artistic forms, and particularly literature, in different genres of poems, dramas, novels, memoirs, autobiographies, and so. And it even became a common topoi within the authors who didn't have an experience of migration to US or working in US. So to just give you a glance of this, this topoi, these are verses from one famous Croatian author from the beginning of 20th century, Dragutin Domjanić, who wrote the song In the Mine, and the verses are going like this. The stock exchange plunged, abandoned mine and scrap wood, broken people, foreigners themselves, cargo from emigrant ships. So what basically interests me here is what kind of a social knowledge on economy literature produce. Basically, what I think is that those questions of work, capitalism, migration are not, it's dangerous to leave them just to the economist. And I believe that literature produces this specific knowledge about those things, which is kind of, has a different logic, and it's also different effect. So, particularly in this talk, I will focus on two narrative texts that problematize working and living condition in the early 20th century US, and it's written and published by two authors. One of them is a Slovene American author, Louis Adamić, and this is his semi-fictional work, autobiographical novel entitled Laughing in the Jungle, which was published in New York and London in English on 1932. And Adamić is writing in this novel about his experience of migration from Slovenia, back then part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and till the 30s, 30 years of 30s marked by the Great Depression in United States. So Adamić is also, we can say, kind of a representative figure of Slavic immigrant writer. He really had a big success in the United States. Many of these books are also available in your library and are all published in English language. And another is memoirs by Yugoslav political activist Stjepan Loen, and his book Memoirs of an Immigrant, which is published in Zagreb in Croatia in 1963, but is also writing about the same period, basically, on which is Adamić also writing. These are early years of 20th century till his return to Yugoslavia in 1947, as he articulated by the end of his book as a new promised land, and we will come to that part later. So both of these texts are writing about the same experience of migration to the U.S. in these years of harsh expansion of monopolistic industrial capitalism, and we can detect similar textual strategies in writing about their experience, especially in questioning this utopian idea of the United States, which they are contrasting to this real working and living condition experience which they have. And my conditional thesis is, and actually notes from while reading their pieces, is that economy in this text is functioning as a generator of narration and as a force which affects all other issues included in this text. And in this regard, these works are pointing to the complex relationship of economy and literature, which I mentioned before, and are challenging what we can say inadequacy and narrowly pointed economic knowledge, which is, I don't know, since we can say second part of the 20th century mostly dominated by statistics and mathematics, and which also lost its humanistic perspective in the way. And I will say that literature challenges this narrow and even imperial character of economy in these days, which became kind of a magic word. For example, also in today's science, if we are writing any kind of project in humanities, we might say what will be economic impact of this, but that is just the different logic of the impact of art and humanities. And this is also part of, we can say trendy new studies in literature, which are dealing with this topic. And I will just mention here one of the newly published volume on these issues, published by Turkish researchers Çinli Akdere and British researchers Kristen Baron and Bruna Ingaro, entitled Economics and Literature. And these texts, which I will refer to my talk today, perfectly fits, I will say, to their definitions of what type of knowledge is literature producing. And literary texts basically provide pictures of economic life, which may be read as testimony or even evidence on the historical societies they are portrayed. Or with a more sophisticated eye, in a critical distance, they may be deciphered as reflecting the values, opinions, and conflicts about economic life, which writers perceive in contemporary societies and bring to light in their writings. Feelings and thoughts, as embodied in the stories writers tells, give life to the mediation, conversation on controversies by past or contemporary characters about how the hard world of markets intrudes into the deeper, wider world of human destinies, asking for choices, offering opportunities, or imposing heavy constraints. Money or markets, speculation and bankruptcy, hard work, poverty or wealth, when looked from a broader cultural perspective, may be recognized as being part of wider metaphors of human parables and existential conflicts or crisis. The literary text offers all of these perspectives to its readers, and literary studies have addressed them all in ample critical reflection dealing with economic life and literature. I can even say that some of the, I will say, more profound economists of today, such as, for example, Thomas Piketty or Yanis Varoufakis, are often mentioning the examples from literature when they want to for example, in the lack of some knowledge on a historical period of economic times, for example, in 19th century, Piketty in his piece of Capital in 21st century is often mentioning Balzac, Jane Austen, Fitzgerald, and saying that we can learn more from this novel than from the statistics about economics in these times. And also Yanis Varoufakis, for example, is where he is also exploring the phenomenon of debt, is, for example, taking two versions of Faust, the drama, one for Christopher Marlowe in 16th century and one from Goethe from 19th century, saying that Faust, the character, has to be punished in the 16th century version because borrowing money with
interest.
Yes, with interest was considered as a sin, which was not like that in 19th century. So that's how he explains these two, for example, ends of these two dramas. So this is really one interesting, exciting topic, which is connecting these two issues. And I also agree with them that those questions are just too important to be left just to the economist. And also another methodological consequence of putting economy in the center of this narration about migration is that that with putting the economy issues in the center, we are challenging this idea of what one Austrian researcher of migration calls a methodological nationalism in researching the question of migration especially in this early 20th century period, when he said that basically the question of identity was pointed at the center of those research. And he's saying, his name is Ulf Brunbauer, and this is his book, Globalizing Southeastern Europe, Immigrants, America, and State since the late 19th century. And he's basically saying that the question who I am was often dominated all other issues of migration problematics. And he considered that much more important to that is for migrant was the question, what shall I do? And I say with this, we are kind of just moving from this centrality of identity question, ethnical issues, which is also dominating, for example, Croatian historiography while dealing with this issue. And I see that these issues of economy can put another very important layer and can give us a more complex view on this issue. I will focus especially on this question of economy, and I will conceptually divide these two narrative texts that I'm putting as my case study on this today's talks by dividing them on the pre-US experience and post-US experience of the characters in those books, even though they're for sure have written and definitely published their pieces after this experience, but also in their narration, these texts are kind of divided in these two sections. So we can say that before the US experience, both of these texts are representing the misery of peasant life of the Austro-Hungarian periphery, describing in detail very poor material conditions, which were the main motive for them to leave their environments. And in both of their texts, we can find really detailed description, for example, what they ate, how they live, how they sleep. For example, they ate, as Stjepan Lojen writes in his book, meat only twice a year for Christmas and Easter. They slept in a large, dozens of people slept in one large room. And what is particularly interesting, he's writing about this bad smell of human feet when they will all put their shoes off. They were suffocating, and especially they say they will bring so much mud with their shoes in the room. And I give myself a liberation to call this to kind of extend this motive of mud to a question of mud metaphor, which is kind of symbolizing this area, this geopolitical, I will say, space in the imagination of these writers. And in Adamić's text, the small village from Slovenia is even called Blato, the mud, and it's kind of a concrete metaphor that the village really exists still these days through that name. But the mud is kind of, I will say, metaphor for the poor material conditions of peasant life from which both of these writers are arriving. Of course, from this, I will say, mud, the idea of United States of America seems like a golden land, like an utopian idea. And before having a real US experience, there's something which I call the 0-degree encounter with the US. This contact with the US was most dominantly manifested through encounters with the returnees, with people who gain already some capital in United States, came back home, built a house, came back home in a new suit with a golden watch, and that was something which really intrigued these writers. And Adamic is writing his impression about this encounter with this what he calls Amerikanets in his village. I can read just shortly, maybe not the whole quote, but just for you to get an impression of this great excitement, what this man symbolized in his back then childhood imagery. As a boy of 9 and even younger in my native village of Blato, that's mud, in Carniola, then a Slovenian Duchy of Austria and later part of Yugoslavia, I experienced a thrill every time one of the men of the little community returned from America. 5 or 6 years before, as I heard people tell, the man had quietly left the village for the United States, a poor peasant clan in homespun with a mustache under his nose and a bundle on his back. Now, a clean-shaven Amerikanets, he sported a blue serge suit, buttoned shoes very large in the toes, and with Indian rubber heels, a black derby, a shiny celluloid collar, and a loud necktie made even louder by a dazzling horseshoe pin, which rumor had it was made of gold, while his 2 suitcases of imitation leather, tied with straps, bulged with gifts from America to his relatives and friends in the village. In 9 cases out of 10, he had left in an economic desperation on money borrowed from some relative in the United States. Now there was a talk in the village that he was worth anywhere from 1,000 to 3,000 American dollars. And to my eyes, he truly bore all with remarks of affluence. Indeed, to say that he thrilled my boyish fancy is putting it mildly. With other boys in the village, I followed him around, and he went visiting his relatives and friends and distributing presents and hung into his every word and gesture. So also meeting with the returnees, another important 0-degree encounter with US was the letters from America, which were also coming to all over the world. In the book called The Nation of Nations, the people who came to America seen through objects, prints, and photographs, which is actually bringing this large impact of documentary culture from immigrants. Letters really take a central part in the period of still not developed communication channels, no television, no radio. We don't even have to mention internet. These letters were the main source of what can be gained in United States, and they will also teasing our narrations, and they were like considered the most important form of communications. And of course, Loyan in his book, he's mediating one of such letters, which his aunt received, and she was a literate woman. He was reading to her this letter, and that how he was, we can say, when he was, he got thrilled with this idea to going to United States. This is his letter when he's basically what he's saying. His uncle is writing how much he earns, and that what teases his imagination. Just to read a short part of the letter, $1.50 a day. That's how much his uncle earned. I quickly begin to calculate in my mind how much time it will take me to buy a few acres of good land and build a beautiful house with such an income. And from that on, I started fantasizing about America. I dreamed that when I returned, I will build a new house with a clean wooden floor, like no more muds and smelly pits and beautiful furniture, so I would live like them in Zagreb. America, that was my life goal from now on. So all this provoked, we can say, myth about America, which has been formed, a conglomeration of often unjustified hopes. And these are some of the most common geographical metaphors of the United States in Croatian language, but I believe also in many other languages: the promised land, the land of plenty, the land of free, and the golden land. just in addition to this narrative literary text, I would like to add also some of the very interesting documentary materials which I found, which are dealing also with the immigration issues from that period. And these are we can call them anti-migration brochures, which is also interesting, were written by writers. And you can, even though they're part of documentary culture, they're not literary texts, they have this strong affective force as literature, and they're often quoting the song against migrations and different stories, like I heard this man really didn't succeed in America, and so on. Okay, this is also, I was just talking to Mary today that I always bring some colorful material, and these are serious times, so more serious questions, but not to lack also some colorful materials. These are also the posters from shipping company and the agents who were also saw the village people as a potential, yes, a capital for their own, and we can also see this utopian colorful imagery. But these are some of the notions from these anti-migration brochures. This is one written by Ivan Lupis Vukic, who was a researcher of migration in the early 20th century period. And that is very interesting how he detects among people in general that people have, as he says, fabulous and fantastic idea what is America. And he's telling this case about one peasant from this region, from Zagreb, in Zagorje, that if you say to this guy, go to Rome to see the Pope, he will say, oh no, Rome is too far. But if you tell him go to Alaska, you can earn money there, he will immediately pack and go to Alaska. That's how he criticized this fantastic, we can say, fictional idea about the United States. And this is also one very interesting brochure by a writer not so well known, Milan Obradović, who has this pamphlet, which is called basically Brothers and Countrymen Don't Go to America, to his good and kind people in Croatia and Slavonia as a serious advice. And and it's also interesting that in this brochure it is written that that you can take it for free. You can take for free this brochure. And speaking about the somehow clash of these conceptual geographical metaphors about the United States, I found particularly in this brochure one really interesting name for America, which I translated as Jamerika, because it's originally Jamerika. Jamer is misery, and this will be kind of Jamerika, like don't go to this Jamerika. You will not find what you seek out there. All these ideas that you have are fabulous and fantastic.
Is the author socialist or not? Because I think it might.
No. So we will come in this period. The socialism, like we will follow how these writers, they also went as a peasant without any kind of particular political awareness, and we can follow them, converted to socialism, and that is now we are coming to that part of my presentation. But we can see how this common idea was kind of mapped in all these texts of literature and documentary culture of the text. So we are now coming to the period of the US experience, the mentioned text, and what are the detecting now? The tables are turned. Now in their text, we are dealing with specific affective capital and moral economy, view from the bottom, view from the working class experience. And this first sentence of first impressions of Stjepan Loen in his book are kind of really impressive in that sort. What he writes is that I felt that the irresistible longing that hold me so much to America was now beginning to lose its strength. So we can, to be more specific on the literary problematic, I'm viewing both of these texts in the sense of what two German scholars, Rüdiger Safranski and Walter Fengers, are calling proletarian autobiography. And this specific genre of proletarian autobiography is putting in focus the factory and the production of life in the factory, everyday torments in the industrial process of works, depicting conflicts between workers and the owner. And that is something which they claim middle class or bourgeois literature was traditionally avoiding. And both of these writers are coming from this, we can say, poor peasant environment, and they're becoming there also political and awareness through this process of working. And just to lean on your comment, we can follow both of these texts as a sort of picaresque novels in which character is changing from this peasant to the self-aware critical socialist. Of course, when we speak about literature, we also, they were all self-taught. They didn't have any kind of formal education. And sorry, we will come to this later. When they're speaking about what was their crucial point in also gaining knowledge about US, not just their real working experience, this is also literature from leftist US literature, of course, Upton Sinclair, they're all quoting Upton Sinclair, and Adamich's novel Laughing in the Jungle is also reference to Sinclair, and we can follow how they are becoming proletarians and socialists, and especially interesting is how they're depicting economic landscape through class struggle. They're putting the question of labor, production, exploitation, and of course at the end resistance at the center of their work. And a very important issue of their texts belongs to representation of body, corporality, and physical aspects of work. And especially this physical fatigue. There are so many detailed descriptions of this physical fatigue in both of the texts. This is one quotation from Loyen. I felt indescribably tired and exhausted. I felt my strength disappearing. My arms and legs required extreme effort. The siren screamed again, announcing it was 6 o'clock. My first working day at work in America was over. I had earned $1.50. That is that $1.50 he was reading about from his uncle letter. Now he's having this real life experience, and we can say this utopian fictional layer of US is disappearing. Also to perceive these texts in aesthetically modes of representation of the era. When I was reading both of these texts, I always kept in my mind, if you remember the famous German director Fritz Lang movie Metropolis. The movie is not representing United States of America explicitly, but it's been traditionally perceived as this futuristic imagery of developed technicized and industrial world of United States. This metropolis per se is perceived as New York often, but also if you can recall the movie iconography. I saw the posters I think in the lobby that it is being also released these days at UT. It's going to be watched at UT. There's also this another layer of representation of workers in this movie, and we are speaking now about the same era. And I just wanted to put you this clip, which is kind of very similar in this to the presentation we are witnessing in, yes, exhaustion, yes. Yes. Or aesthetize yeah. Yes. We were lucky with the presentation, so we can, yeah, with in a more broader context of what the British cultural theorist Raymond Williams would say, a structure of feeling of the epocha is this kind of epoch is this kind of a representation of work, and this is one film critic, Ludmila Jordanova, who is also interpreting the idea of workers in the Fritz Lang's movie as a zombie-like figures and the side effect of this futuristic progress, especially in the question of organization of work, tailor system, and mechanization of working process and the loss of individuality. And this is, of course, something which is also represented in this both of this text. I wanted to add a kind of a contemporary reference to migration experience, which is kind of a similar, but we couldn't find. It says that the clip cannot be viewed from this country, so I was, which is very. It's not by chance, but if you have an option to see Goran Paskaljević movie Someone Else's America from 1995, which is also representing the US working and living experience from the perspective of Yugoslav migrants, especially Montenegrins. You can, I advise you to see this movie. The beginning of that movie was very similar to what we saw before, but in a new cinematographic language. But okay, let's.
Where did it go?
Yeah, okay, it's here. And also in this text, we can dealing with metaphors of workers. Of course, negative metaphors, which will be critically pointed in this text, migrant workers as slaves or garbage, or often đubre. Adamić is using this word đubre, which is the name for trash in original in his texts in English, or labor market as a slave market, which is pointing to this inhuman exploitation of workers. There are really many quotations which I will not read, but with really detailed descriptions of this working progress, which are working process, which are dismantling as an echo this in the first part of their text, utopian building of United States of America. But what is also important here, that both of these texts are glorifying resistance and strikes. Okay, this is also one side effect. There are many speaking about cruelty of this period when the workers didn't have any kind of social health insurance. There are many cruel scenes. That's why I explain the title of my talk, really cruel scenes of accidentals at the workplace, injuries, not just within these two texts, but in a whole area of migrant literature on this topic. I also would like to mention one story of one immigrant writer, Gabro Karabin, who wrote his story in English about this terrible accident which happened in factory. He won a $1,000 prize for this story, and he didn't wrote again. That is a very interesting story, but the story was all about how workers are getting injured and killed during the working process. But let me return to my previous thought about glorifying strikes and resistance. So Loen, he became political activist, deeply engaged in syndicates, in organizing strikes. There are numerous strikes just mentioned in his works. These are just some of the few. They're both, for example, glorifying the resistance of Sacco and Vanzetti to famous Italian workers who were innocently accused for their dangerous activities, and how Loen is writing about this accusation in, we can say, socialist pathos. They were accused because they believed that future belongs to Marx and not to Freud. Oh, not to Freud. It belongs to Poštovani.
Not the angels.
I would be satisfied.
Yeah. Absolutely. The proverbial slip, you know. Yeah, but it's the famous case, Sacco and Vanzetti, you know.
Yes.
History.
Yes, and all the socialist writer calls like socialism a kind of a logic choice from both Adamic and Loen. And Loen is returning to Yugoslavia in 1947, and he's returned with a ship when he also detailed description of the ship entering to Yugoslavia national waters, and he's saying, like, he's describing new Yugoslavia in 1947 as a new promised land when there will be like no class differences, where people will have decent life. We can see like a new myth in creating. But also Adamic, there's also speculation he was assassinated after World War II, and they said that he committed a suicide, but they say that there's a theory that he was assassinated also because he supported Tito, Yugoslavia, socialism, and so on. But we can follow also their development, their political development, and their, from the ignorant peasants, they're becoming a socialist, glorifying resistance, and speaking with we can say revolutionary pathos about all these issues. And to kind of to conclude my my views on this topic, we can see, and what I found particularly interesting, challenging all these tons of literature, which are mostly were dealing as a migrant, as a identity figure, ethnical figure, who am I, what is my language, to who am I belong, what kind of, you know, ethnical brotherhoods we achieved in a foreign countries. I believe that these economic issues is really important, especially while speaking of this sort of politically active migrants. And I perceive a migrant primarily articulated as a class rather than
Mhm.
ethnic category when we put economy in this equation. We can see how both of these texts are critically self-aware of this fantastic utopian idea in provoking this geographical imagination about United States, which persists even to these days. Now I'm teaching a class about this, and I on the first day when I meet my students, I tell them they must write an essay about their perception of America, and there is always this I
Share those thoughts.
okay and
Information.
yeah
Google Translate.
yeah and only in like 4 generation of my students, only one actually visited United States,
Mhm.
but they all have really particular idea what is America, and this utopian imagery you just cannot avoid, even though
Mhm.
they are we can say kids of 21st century, well
They have
informed,
information,
they
yeah.
have information, they see the other side, but they say like, oh, we want to visit. There's always, I can just feel, sense this idea, which is, of course, I'm also kind of dismantling this idea in my own experience. That's why I wrote this
Mhm.
poem called Jamerika, about my misconceptions and individual and collective imagery about the United States. But we can see when we are speaking in the early 20th century period, we can see this high awareness of this fictional, very dangerous quality of this idea, which they are dismantling, discursively dismantling in both of their texts, primarily by contrasting their real working and living experience to this imaginary one. And to kind of highlight the role of literature, we are speaking about one really straightforward narrative. Like we have peasants who are trying to get capital, which are traveling to the parts of the world because capital is unequally distributed to the world. They want to get to this economic gain, which is, of course, a narrative which works. Like many went to America, many acquired the capital, many didn't, but only few of them returned with this critical self-awareness. And we can see how literature complicates this economically straightforward narrative. And if those writers didn't gain economic capital, they gained this symbolic capital of critical self-awareness, and both of these texts are telling about this experience. Thank you very much for your
Thank you.
attention.
It was great. Thank you very much, and I see that probably we do have a lot of questions in the chat, but
I would say, let's first go to the people who are here
yeah.
Okay.
in the room, and then we can turn to the chat where people have. I like some of the comments in the chat. Oh, and then we can turn to our audience on Zoom. David, if you have a question.
Yes, thank you so very much, Maša, for your talk. That's fantastic. And I particularly appreciate how you're kind of bringing the immigrant's experience back to the under focus on the humanities. And in particular, I was thinking about migrant farm workers, Latino American migrant farm workers either in California or along the Texas border, and their experiences and kind of their brush with the capitalist boot on their neck, making pennies on the dollar. Well, especially with the discourse of many Americans saying they don't have a home here in the United States. They need to stop stealing or mooching or all that. When nobody else wants to do that work. And so I was really curious how, if you, in your experience with these texts, how the concept of race, how you might have seen the concept of race come up. So just your thoughts.
Thank you so much for this question. This is kind of a question from heaven to my to what I want to say, because my expose at ACES is about socialist view on race and labor in socialist travel writings to America. So this is really a great question. That is something which I find particularly interesting. It is becoming more prominent in the socialist period. Okay, in the period of Soviet Russia before Mayakovsky is visiting US in 20s, Ilf and Petrov are visiting US in 37, and I'm also pointing to first Yugoslav travel writing to United States from 1945. And the peak of their critique of US capitalism is this economic subordination of people of color, what we can say there. And they say they're all declare socialist, and they say there's no socialism for America in that period. They say it is only for exploited Mexicans, African American workers, and so. And my thesis of this actually talk is that that only this political aware socialists could see these close connections of class and racial oppression, which is deeply interconnected. And they really pointing that as the peak of their critique of US capitalism in that period. But there's also, I also in those texts, I found so many examples of solidarity between, for example, Slavic immigrant workers and African American Mexican workers. And like Dedier is, for example, saying, if you ask where are the Serbians, go ask where are the Mexicans, you will find them together. So that is something which is particularly highlighted in these texts written from this socialist perspectives. Yeah.
Very interesting. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much. This is the earlier period, and we are here at the same time following the development of their consciousness, getting the political awareness. Those texts from the later period they're already like politically aware. They already like have this particularly tuned communist eyes on what they will see in US. Yeah. Thank you.
Go ahead.
I have, okay, a couple questions. One's really quick, the other's a little bit longer, but they're both. Okay, the first one is, I was really struck when you were talking about, I guess this is a quote from Lowen about his dream to go over, how much that dream to go to the US was tied to a dream of coming back. You know, like, then I will come back and build a house, you know, and so I'm just wondering if that is a theme you see a lot, because it's like one thing to go over there and then, you know, you're still the poorest of the poor, but with this knowledge of bringing that back, it's $1.50 is a lot in Croatia, maybe, or in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, maybe not so much in the US. So that is one. And then the other, I'm interested in how it's kind of written into these kind of ideas of the US. It seems like very kind of, you're talking about capitalism in general, but what about like the American brand of capitalism? Because I was thinking about like, I was immediately thinking about, again, this is not from the view of kind of a worker or a migrant, but more of a travelogue, but Aleko Konstantinov to Chicago back, where he comes over and at first he's sort of wowed, and then he's like, oh my God, this is disgusting. And it's only, you know, people only want money. And also they're working to what end? All they do is work. There's no relaxation. There's no sitting there, you know, having your kebabcha and rakia. Like you're working all the time. What's the point? And this is American. This is something that's specifically American. So I'm wondering if how they put the context or the American, you know, kind of idea of capitalism in the West in the context of what would be the European kind of capitalism in the West.
Yeah, thank you. These are really great questions. And when we are speaking about this idea of return, we can now we can kind of discuss it. It has this sociological angle, like real life angle, and effect in literature. So we can say that is always this idea of return is present among the immigrants in general, but also in those literary texts. And that is like, I will go there, I will gain the capital, and I will return. But this is also very in the sense of literature topoi I will say, the most tragic part of those texts, like
Mhm.
for them not be able to come back. This is the Loen, in Loen's terms, he is coming as a socialist with no capital. He only gets, like, he gets his friends from union are giving him one pen, like a shaving material or so, but he's not going with that, coming back with that money he was dreaming about.
Mhm.
But he doesn't find that even important, because in Yugoslavia he will have it all now.
Going back. to
1947, yes. But this idea of tragic point of there's like many stories, especially in this early period and beyond of, for example, there's this one book, it's also, you can find it in the Library of Congress, short stories about Stevan Danevsky. There's this story about the guy who was like dreaming, he's called His Last Day at Work.
Mhm.
And he didn't even have to go to his last day, but he said, okay, now I'm done, I have my money, he has a ticket, he will return home. And he go to his last day at work and he got crushed in some, machine and so on. So this is this tragic, I think it's this, this kind of double disappointment of what US utopia is, and the double disappointment of not being able to return home as some kind of a tragic non-happy end, which is very common topoi in literature. Yeah.
Maša, if you allow me, Mary, because you tapped into something really interesting. That was, first of all, fascinating perspective. And I'm very curious about the book that when it gets published, because from one end, it is a genre, literally critique of utopia. And it has a very particular context, and what is even best is that the perspective is coming from our region, looking towards the the utopia, and then there's this travel to utopia and then the opposite journey. So do you consider those as literally works of anti-utopia? Because I was thinking constantly there is a rich literary genre, right, of producing utopias, and then anti-utopias, which are dystopias, in fact, which represent, sort of the contact is what you call really interesting, like the 0 degree contact, and then you produce those literary works, which have very interesting for me, from my perspective, even how they are perceived among the people that will read them at home. How's that comparing to the utopia produced at hand, and what they make out of it, if there is a documentary evidence of this transformation. Wow, you were the guy that wanted to make it, and that was my only goal. I think that was one of the quotes, or my sole goal when he heard from the uncle, and now you're coming back preaching something completely else. That is cognitive dissonance of a magnitude, especially for people that never left. The guy thinks that Rome is, so it started me, but again, utopias, anti-utopias, and dystopias.
It's a great question, and the very idea of the utopian genre is actually connected with the European discovery of America. I'm putting a quotation mark because we can ask who needs to be discovered, yes. But Thomas More and 16th century, all are these consequences of this, big world exploration. And when we are speaking about this idea, they say that America is just kind of a concrete place when Europeans put their utopian imagery in it. Even Columbus in his diaries, he's writing, I found a paradise on earth, and so, and it's closely connected. It's kind of it has this mythical roots within the very idea of America and exploration of the new continents back then. And what is also interesting, very soon, this utopian genre, it is also like a yin yang, like utopian genre is so closely connected with anti-utopian. We have like first writing of Bartolomé de las Casas about the violence over there, and that is something which is really conflict, that is always kind of this Janusanian kind of idea of these two oppositions. It's strongly affecting this idea of America. And what I see that these texts which I'm researching, which are situated in non-US perspective, has this urge to problematize, of course, this idea. So for sure, this utopian and anti-utopian genre is something from the larger perspective which can be applied to this view for sure. I'm in this book. It will have like 500 pages because I'm dealing for this idea of in the 20th century, but in different genre. My migrant perspective is really important, and it's taking also like I would say 1/3 of my book. But there's also like different. So many writers who don't have any kind of US experience are so confidently writing about the US. So it's it's.
Thank you for for addressing this, because I think that squarely falls within this bigger tradition of utopias, dystopias, and this is a very distinct look on this contact, from utopia to dystopia, and yet within one lifespan. I mean, we don't have that many stories of that, so that is a unique contribution. So congratulations on that.
Thank you so much. There's a thin line between utopia and dystopia, what we know in our lives, for example.
Yeah, I have a couple of small comments. First of all, that what I saw that in your focus is fiction literature, but if you look at the periphery, and you mentioned, for example, Taylorism, and I know that in the Soviet literature that time it was a big deal. There was even a special phenomenon, this labor poetry. Then they poeticized the scientific management. So what was impact in this case, it's like on the one side, and on the other side probably also labor folklore, these labor songs, they also create this very strong images, which I can imagine they were transferred to the fiction literature. That was one. And the second one, to build up, I think, on David's comment that this in business history, there is a big debate now about this relation between the nationality and capitalism and firm. And today, this global capitalism and multinational companies, they are kind of bad guys, that strongly criticized. But that time, it's still the first wave of globalization and internationalism, which is strongly connected to socialism. So how does your observations help us to understand better this idea of internationalism and globalization?
Okay, thank you for this question. I just forgot that I didn't answer to your question. So no. So I don't know. Okay, maybe I will. I can do both, and then they're of course connected. And what you ask about, what is specific about US capitalism, I will say that in today's talk, I focused dominantly on this idea of working experience and this pre-US idea of America. But what is also important part of the particularly US imagery, not just in this text, but in this whole archive of texts which I'm dealing, is this a notion of consumerism and the abundance, which this is something which they're astonished at the first glance, but then, like you say, they're discussed very, very soon about it. And we have this European, or when we're speaking about the later periods of socialism, this idea of quality of life. What is quality of life? But busyness and not having time for leisure is something which is for sure also a very important part of criticism of US capitalism. Like they can have 5 cars, but they don't have a time for dinner, and so on. So this is, I will say, and of course, in this earlier period, the Austro-Hungarian was also like capitalistic formation, but these are really voices from the periphery, from the bottom part of it. So this is the different type of capitalism, which they're more in sense of the oppression, also like, of course, ethnicity cannot be avoided, but it's not crucial for this understanding. Thank you. And this is really interesting. We are speaking about time of at least this early 20th century period when socialism and capitalism were kind of equally competitive narratives on modernity in that part. And all the Soviet writers who are visiting US, especially Mayakovsky, are curious to see this technological, and he's a futurist himself, he's fascinated with technology. They wanted to see what is, and also what can be applied to the Soviet to Russia as a good experience. So this and in this period, those two narratives, we are not still at the period of end of history where global capitalism kind of became victorious, predominant narrative. In this part, they're still kind of, competing quite much. So we have also this view on Taylorism from the Soviet writers who are wanted to see, okay, they say they are productive, but they see this dehumanization of workers as something really bad, loss of individuality. The work is kind of divided, and yes. And what is also interesting in Law and Experience, he on 1917, there's this really memoirs, his memories are really long, so I didn't have time to mention all the parts of it, but on 1917, he's going to see the Russian Revolution over there, and that is also one important aspect of gaining his political awareness. And these, we can say also that this representation of labor is mostly through these exploitative aspects of the labor in the US. We have also in the socialist realist literature, glorification of labor, yes, and so, but this is like a specific representation of capitalist labor, which we are dealing with in these texts.
We have a question here that from someone in our Zoom, so I want to, Emil,
Yes.
would you like to ask your question?
Yes. Hi, and thank you, Maša, for your wonderful presentation. I have a question and a comment. The question is about your larger project and what other writers and kind of works you are looking at. I was fascinated by, I mean, it just, to me, it was interesting that you chose to present on two authors who, one returned to Yugoslavia or Croatia, and the other one, wrote My Native Land in praise of Yugoslavia. So these are, which I think I was just wondering to hear what the others and the backgrounds of the other ones were, which then leads me to the second question. And I think it's very important that Mary asked you about the American brand of capitalism, because I think it's also important to think about and appreciate the American brand of socialism also. And here I would, without wish to be confrontational or adversarial, but I would maybe urge you to maybe think less rigidly about the kind of tensions between identity and class in the American context, because I think the American labor movement, especially in these years at the turn of the 20th century, was formulated in the national idiom. And I didn't know any of this and came to this. I don't work on American labor. I just started reading Yiddish anarchist memoirs, which actually are travel narratives as well, from the old country to America, and they all and basically when I started reading about the Jewish labor movement, I realized that a lot of organizing was done around Jewish holidays, synagogues, and I then when I started reading about it, I realized that it's also the case for all other ethnic groups like Finns, Balts, Lithuanians, Germans. There are all kinds of labor movements. And I'll drop just in the chat the link on. Maybe you heard about Maxo Vanka, but he was a Croatian immigrant who did these wonderful murals in a Croatian church in Pittsburgh, and here I think you can see what I'm talking about, where these all the kinds of expressions about class and even race in his case are in these images and murals that are in a very identitarian place in a Catholic church. So yeah, thank you so much. I don't mean to, I think your word, this is great, and I'm looking forward to more, and I'm gonna come to your AC's presentation. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Emil, so much for this really profound notions. And of course, I agree with you that US labor history is very complex, and it's also has its own socialist history. And of course, this is kind of I just took this kind of a niche of these authors and this context in my presentation. But what I also see, and maybe I didn't point it enough, that both of these writers and also others writers as well, which I'm dealing with, are emphasizing this international aspect of labor culture, especially in forms of solidarity between strikers, and so on. So I will for sure take your notions and consider it even in more detail in my material. And speaking about my archive, I'm kind of a compulsive researcher. I take everything, give me everything. And this archive really has no limits. That's the problem, that I'm working on this book so much, because, I need to see this, I need to see the context, then I need to see the comparative context. And I'm my only limits are 20th century, because I'm combining it with this idea of, I'm also questioning this idea of 20th century as American century, and I'm offering this non-US view on the US imagery of 20th century. And it's also broader than capitalism, but capitalism is kind of a dominant issue. It's just kind of a centrifugal force, which even though if you take some other aspect, you will kind of end up on reflecting capitalism. And this archive basically has no limit. And I'm also regarding different genres. My first chapter is on the idea of discovery, how the discovery was being the idea of discovery was being presented in the 20th century Croatian authors. We have you probably all heard about Miroslav Krleža. He has this really amazing drama called Christopher Columbus, when he is offering basically at the beginning of the century, this first part of the century, this post-colonial view on this idea of discovery, connecting with capitalism of his days. He's also, for example, this is avant-garde drama which we have like very different various aspects of mix. It's not historically about the discovery, but it is situated in the night before discovery, and we have the workers on the boat who have organized work on the tailor system, and so on. So really, this is like, I'm starting with this idea about utopian and dystopian genre, which is rising for this idea to really different travel writings from the beginning of the century, authors such as Ante Tresić-Pavičić, who were, for example, very sensitive to this idea of exploitation of Croatian workers, but no sensitivity regarding race, for example. He is really writing on 97, really like on racial issues, really with no with really no sensitivity, with really bad language and so. But he's very sensitive to this when Croatian workers are exploited. I don't know, but like, and then I'm comparing also to then the later travel writings, but also to poems, to dramas. So like, from Tesić Pavičić to Vladimir Dedijer, Slavko Kolar, to Goran Tribeson at the end, to Slavenka Drakulić and Dubravka Ugršić, who are actually reflecting the dissolution of Yugoslavia through the topoi of America. Dubravka Ugršić in her books of essay, American Fictionary, or From Balkan War to American Dream, and Slavenka Drakulić in her book of essays, How We Survived Communism, and she is still keeping this socialist perspective in post-socialist time and so on. So I'm inclusive in my archive. If you have anything and you want to prolong my writing of the podcast, email me the titles.
Thank you.
It's like Valentina has a
Mhm.
question.
Hi, thank you so much for your paper. I really appreciated the historical perspective and the German references. Wonderful. And I meant to ask you this. So nowadays, migrant workers are looking towards Western Europe, which has become almost like the new America. And there are many similarities, obviously, and differences, but working experience, human trafficking and so on, the slaves, the working, the exhaustion and so on, is very similar. So, and many of them probably, America seems to have lost its luster a little bit. Maybe also because it's so far and you need to cross an ocean to get there. But what are your thoughts on this? Because this is more contemporary now, and maybe it has nothing to do with Croatian migrant workers. I don't know, but I know Romanian migrant workers are definitely in that situation.
Thank you so much. I will refer to the contemporary situation, but before that, I just want to point out how in all these texts from the 20th century, and especially earlier period till 50s, 60s, Ellis Island is one also tragic topoi. It's like a fearful topoi and a fearful motive in all the texts that I'm discussing. And what can we see now in recent days, how these meta-geographical conceptions are changing. And for example, during the refugee crisis on 2050, we have so many people from Syria and Afghanistan, for example, coming to Croatia, dreaming of a better life, dreaming of this utopia. And then we have not just Croatian, but European state.
European Union.
Yes, European Union. I always need to point the exception of, civil rights workers who really did such a huge work on the terrain. But these, state officers, which were just acting as a small, like policemen, like, oh, what are they coming here? They're just running away because, and it's very ironical that they took economic reasons for, even though evidently there was a war, there's like repression and everything, but they kind of disqualified economic reasons, like, oh, they just want a better life. But yeah, and then you have the history of your own people migration from the 20th century. Of course, they want better life. It's legitimate to have pursue for better life in a material sense. But that was kind of, for example, this is my experience of talking with the policemen while we were hosting the refugees, like, oh, you are doing something, but they just came, war is not a thing, they just want to have a better life. Yeah, so what? Yeah. So, but we can see how these meta-geographical conceptions are changing in they're always like west can be more east and east can be more west. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, this was truly great. I mean, we do appreciate the talk. I think, Mary, do we have more questions, or I think?
Oh, I think no. That's keep clapping.
Oh, keep clapping.
Thank you.
Thank you much.
Some comments also about the Romanian village in Borat is also called the Glod. Okay. Yes, it's a metaphor. Yes. Yeah.
So much for being the guest for now. And thank you everyone here for coming. And we We have tea and cookies if people are.
Thank you very much.
Hungry.
And yeah, we missed this in person. I think I
Yeah.
enjoyed
Yeah.
it tremendously.
Yeah.
Not to say that, our Zoom audience, but it's really great to have this in person and to have the circle, which is also important, where we can.
Square circle.
It's not a circle, but still.
Yeah.
Squaring the circle. But at least it's very good discussions, especially when new things are coming out and the authors themselves can be, or tell us the ideas and what they really meant. And what are the important concepts. And then again, I think the Balkan Circle is, the platform. So thank you very much.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much.
And looking forward to see you
Yes.
next
Week
circle.
after next, yeah.
Week after next. Thank
All
you.
right, bye.
Thank you.